The room was colder than it needed to be, not because of the air conditioning humming quietly through the vents, but because of what was happening inside it. Downtown Chicago, 42 floors above the street. A corporate law office designed to feel powerful, not human. Glass walls framed the room on three sides, revealing the skyline like a reminder that the world outside was still moving. Polished walnut table, leather chairs that cost more than my first car. Framed law degrees lined the walls like trophies, evidence of victories that had nothing to do with love, yet everything to do with endings. This was the kind of room where lives didn't explode. They were erased cleanly, professionally, with ink. I sat on one side of the table, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across from me sat Daniel, my husband, or at least the man who had been my husband for 7 years. Between us lay a neatly stacked pile of papers, divorce documents clipped together, pages heavy with language that turned a shared life into legal fragments. Assets, property, final separation, 7 years reduced to bullet points. The attorney cleared his throat, his voice calm, neutral, rehearsed. As we discussed, he said, sliding the folder slightly closer to me, this agreement reflects a mutual decision. Once signed, it becomes legally binding. Mutual. The word hung there, inaccurate and unchallenged. Daniel didn't look at me. He sat back in his chair, posture relaxed, arms resting comfortably, on the table as if he were attending a meeting he'd already won. His suit was tailored navy blue, crisp lines, flawless fit. The cufflinks caught the light as he shifted. Custom engraved. I knew those cufflinks. Daniel had bought them for himself after closing a big deal last year. He'd called them a reward. I'd smiled, congratulated him, swallowed the familiar feeling of being an audience member in my own marriage. That should have told me everything. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. We just choose not to name it. The attorney pushed the papers fully toward me. Just sign here, he said gently, tapping the line with his pen. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. People imagine divorce as explosive shouting, accusations, tears that spill across conference tables. That wasn't us. There were no raised voices, no dramatic speeches. Ours was quiet, controlled, emotionally bankrupt. I signed my name. Each letter steady, practiced. Final. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words ever could. When I slid the papers back across the table, our fingers brushed just for a second. A spark of memory hit me so hard it almost knocked the breath from my lungs. Late-night takeout on the living room floor. Road trips with no destination. The way he used to reach for my hand without thinking. Then it vanished. Daniel pulled his hand away first. The attorney nodded, satisfied. That concludes everything. Daniel stood up immediately, adjusting his jacket. Good luck, he muttered. 2 words. No apology. No acknowledgement. No thank you for 7 years of loyalty, compromise, and emotional labor he never noticed. I stood up too, grabbed my purse, and walked out before the tightness in my chest could turn into something visible. You can walk away from a room, but parts of you stay behind. The elevator ride down felt endless. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls, eyes dry, face calm, posture composed. I looked like someone who had everything under control. When the doors opened, the city rushed in like nothing had happened. Chicago moved on without hesitation. Car horns echoed down the street. People hurried past, talking, laughing, checking their phones. Coffee cups steamed. Buses roared. Life continued as if mine hadn't just quietly collapsed. That night, I returned to the apartment that no longer felt like mine. I packed only what I needed. I left the rest. I placed my keys on the counter. Next to the bowl, Daniel insisted we keep perfectly aligned. I took one last look around. No tears. Not yet. Some pain waits until you're finally alone. I closed the door behind me. And for the first time in 7 years, I stepped into a future that terrified me and somehow felt honest. 3 weeks later, while going through my phone, Instagram told me my ex-husband had remarried. Sometimes the world delivers news before your heart has even caught up to the loss. I wasn't searching for him. I wasn't stalking his page or replaying old photos the way people assume divorced women do. I had been doing what everyone does late at night when sleep won't come. Scrolling aimlessly, thumb moving on autopilot, brain half checked out. A coworker's vacation photo, a sponsored address for skincare, a video of someone's dog wearing sunglasses. Then suddenly, there he was, Daniel, front and center, The image stopped my thumb mid-scroll like a physical force. He stood in a tailored wedding suit, perfectly groomed, perfectly positioned, one arm wrapped confidently around a woman in white. A professional photographer's touch was obvious, the lighting warm, flattering, intentional. The caption read, "Forever starts now." I stared at the screen. My chest didn't tighten the way I expected it to. Instead, there was a strange stillness, like my body had been preparing for this moment before my mind knew it was coming. Thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments flooded beneath the photo. "So happy for you. About time. She's stunning. Such an upgrade. Your dream woman." That phrase kept repeating. Dream woman. As if love were a product. As if wives were interchangeable. As if happiness were measured by aesthetics and speed. I zoomed in on the photo despite myself. I told myself I was curious. Detached. Over it. But curiosity has a way of revealing truths we're not consciously looking for. Daniel looked exactly as he always had, composed. Confident. Pleased with how everything appeared. His smile was familiar, polished, controlled. Then I looked at her. She was beautiful in a way that felt intentional. Hair styled within an inch of perfection. Makeup flawless. Dress custom fitted. Everything about her screamed effort. But her eyes didn't match her smile. They were tense. Alert. As if she was bracing for something just outside the frame. Her jaw was tight, barely relaxed enough to hold the smile in place. Her fingers gripped Daniel's arm, not gently, not affectionately, but firmly. Like someone holding onto a railing during turbulence. This wasn't joy. This was pressure, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. My phone buzzed nonstop as the algorithm did what it does best, pushing the image into every possible corner of my digital life. Friends texted, "Did you see this?" "I'm so sorry." He moved on fast. Family members called. I didn't answer. I muted my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. Then I did something that surprised even me. I went to bed, and for the first time in months, I slept, deeply, without replaying conversations, without wondering what I could have done differently, without the familiar ache of trying to understand someone who never truly wanted to be understood, because Daniel hadn't healed. He had replaced. Some people don't sit with loss, they outrun it. They rush into new beginnings not because they're ready, but because they can't tolerate silence. They confuse motion with growth. They confuse attention with love. I knew Daniel well enough to recognize the pattern. He didn't grieve relationships. He curated them. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight instead of dread. Coffee tasted stronger. The apartment felt quieter, but not lonely. I checked my phone once more. The photo was everywhere. Shared, saved, celebrated, but the more I looked at it, the clearer something became. That woman wasn't smiling because she felt safe. She was smiling because she was trying not to fail, and I knew that feeling intimately. I had worn that smile at company events, at dinners with his colleagues, at family gatherings where I learned exactly how much space I was allowed to take up. I remembered standing beside Daniel at a corporate holiday party years earlier, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, nodding at conversations that revolved around him. I remembered the tightness in my jaw, the calculation behind every expression. Smile, but not too much. Speak, but not too loudly. Shine, but never brighter than him. Seeing her face was like looking into a mirror from my past, and instead of jealousy, I felt clarity. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere across town, Daniel was celebrating his forever, but forever built on avoidance has an expiration date. I didn't feel replaced. I felt relieved. Because what he had chosen wasn't love, it was continuation. Same dynamic. New face. And for the first time since signing those papers, I knew something with absolute certainty. I had escaped. Once the shock faded, memory took over. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Memory arrived quietly, uninvited, slipping into moments of stillness the way fog creeps into a city at dawn. I would be standing in line at the grocery store when a scene from years ago would surface, folding laundry on a Sunday afternoon, sitting at my desk at work, driving home with the radio low. That's how the truth returns, not in explosions but in fragments. You often ignore the signs until it's too late to change them. Looking back, Daniel had always loved admiration more than intimacy. He loved being seen, being praised, being validated. He didn't crave connection. He craved alignment. I remembered how carefully he curated our life together. What we posted, where we went, who we socialized with. Every choice filtered through the question. He never asked out loud, but always answered internally. How does this make me look? At the time, I called it ambition. I told myself successful men were wired differently, but ambition builds. Control contains. The difference matters. One memory returned with uncomfortable clarity. The night I got my promotion. It had been a long time coming. Years of late nights, strategic patience swallowing frustration. When my boss called me into his office and told me the news, my hands had actually shaken. Senior role, bigger salary, real authority. I had called Daniel immediately, excitement spilling over before I could contain it. That's great, he'd said. We should celebrate. That night we went to a nice restaurant downtown. Candlelight, white tablecloths, the kind of place he liked because it felt important. At first he listened, or at least he appeared to, but slowly, subtly the conversation shifted. How will this affect your hours? Will it require more travel? Do you think it might create imbalance? By dessert, the celebration had become a negotiation. By the time we got home, the night wasn't about my achievement anymore. It was about reassuring him. I had ended the evening apologizing for succeeding. I called it compromise back then. I told myself relationships required balance, sacrifice, understanding. But compromise assumes two people are adjusting. What I was doing was erasing parts of myself to preserve his comfort. Daniel had a way of making my emotions feel inconvenient. When I was hurt, he said, "You're too sensitive." When I asked for reassurance, he said, "You're overthinking." When I needed support, he said, "You're creating drama." Each phrase delivered calmly, rationally, reasonably. That's how control often sounds. Logical enough to doubt your own feelings. I remembered how often I questioned myself. Am I asking for too much? Am I imagining this? Should I be grateful instead? Daniel never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He was consistent. Consistently dismissive. Consistently unavailable when things weren't about him. Consistently threatened by anything that pulled focus away. I thought love meant adapting. But love doesn't require you to disappear. Some relationships aren't built on mutual growth. They're built on compliance. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad for the version of myself who had tried so hard to be easy, understanding, low maintenance. I had learned how to anticipate his moods, how to soften my opinions, how to translate my needs into requests small enough not to offend. That wasn't partnership. That was emotional management, and I had been very good at it. The memories kept coming. The way he took credit in conversations that involved my ideas. The way he subtly corrected me in public. The way he expected praise but offered criticism as help. I remembered the first time I noticed I had stopped sharing certain thoughts. Not because he forbade them, because it was easier not to. That's how shrinking begins. Quietly, incrementally, without announcement. Seeing his new wife's face in that photo hadn't hurt because she was beautiful. It hurt because she looked like someone trying not to fail a role she hadn't yet realized was impossible to win. And I knew exactly how heavy that role felt. The truth was simple and devastating at the same time. Daniel didn't want a partner. He wanted a reflection. Someone who would angle herself just right so his image stayed intact. Understanding that changed everything. Because once you name a pattern, you stop blaming yourself for it. And once I stopped blaming myself, something inside me finally loosened. I wasn't broken. I had been bending. And now I was done. The charity gala was everything Daniel had ever loved. Status, visibility, applause wrapped in tuxedos and evening gowns. It was held at a historic hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of place that still smelled faintly of polished brass and old money. Valets lined the entrance. Camera flashes popped as donors arrived. Smiles practiced, names whispered. I almost didn't go. The invitation had been sitting on my kitchen counter for days. Its heavy cream paper catching my eye every time I walked past. It was for a foundation I'd supported long before my marriage before. Daniel had turned generosity into networking, but something in me wanted to reclaim the space. Not for him, for myself. So I went. I wore a simple black dress, elegant without trying too hard. Hair loose, makeup minimal. I didn't need armor that night. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and soft jazz. Conversations overlapped in polished tones. Servers moved gracefully with trays of champagne. And then I saw them. Daniel stood near the center of the room, laughing too loudly, one hand resting possessively on her lower back. His new wife. The woman from the photo. She looked stunning, no question about it. Her dress was fitted, her posture impeccable. She looked like someone who had prepared carefully for the role she was playing. But her body was tense. Even from across the room, I could see it. Her shoulders were slightly raised, as if she were bracing herself. Her smile appeared and disappeared depending on who was watching. When Daniel spoke, she nodded quickly. Too quickly, like someone afraid to miss a cue. Then unexpectedly her eyes found mine. For a brief second the room fell away. The music. The laughter. The clinking glasses. Her smile faltered. Not from jealousy. Not from anger. From fear. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the expression of someone who suddenly realizes they're being seen. Not as a threat. As understanding. I didn't smile back. I didn't look away. I simply held her gaze long enough for the moment to land. And then it passed. Daniel never noticed. He was too busy being admired. Later that evening I found myself at the bar, waiting for a glass of sparkling water. The bartender was mid-pour when I felt a presence beside me. It was her. Up close, the tension was even clearer. The perfect exterior couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath it. Her eyes scanned the room nervously, as if measuring how far Daniel was at any given moment. She leaned in slightly, her voice low. He's intense. Just one word. But it landed like a confession. I met her eyes. I didn't need to ask what she meant. Intensity can look impressive from the outside. Passionate, driven, charismatic. Until you're the one absorbing it. Until every emotion must be managed, every reaction filtered. Every move calibrated to avoid disruption. He likes things a certain way, she added quickly, as if justifying herself. I'm still learning. Learning? The word echoed painfully. I remembered how often I had said the same thing. We stood there in silence for a moment, the bar noise filling the space neither of us knew how to occupy. Then Daniel appeared at her side, his hand settling on her waist, fingers pressing slightly as if to remind her he was there. Everything okay? He asked her, not unkindly. Yes, she said instantly, smiling again. Of course. I watched the transformation happen in real time. The tension vanished behind performance. Daniel turned to me, surprised but composed. Didn't expect to see you here, he said. I support the cause, I replied calmly. He nodded, already losing interest. That's when I understood something with absolute clarity. She wasn't my replacement. She was my reflection. A newer version. Less worn. Still hopeful. As the evening continued, whispers floated through the room the way they always do at events like this. They seem different lately. She looks overwhelmed. He's a lot, isn't he? The truth rarely arrives with announcements. It leaks out in whispers. I left early. Not because I felt small, but because I felt finished. Outside, the night air was cool, grounding. I breathed deeply as I walked toward the exit. Heels clicking softly against marble floors that had seen decades of similar stories unfold. Inside that ballroom, two women had briefly recognized each other across time. One who had survived, one who hadn't yet realized she needed to. And I knew without needing proof that her awakening had already begun. After the gala, the whispers grew louder. They didn't arrive all at once. They never do. The truth prefers to seep rather than shout. A mutual acquaintance mentioned they had seen Daniel and his wife arguing outside a restaurant. Another casually observed that she always looked exhausted at work events. Someone else joked, half uncomfortable, half curious, that Daniel had high standards. High standards. That phrase had followed him like a compliment his entire life. But standards aren't the problem. Control is. I didn't ask questions. I didn't lean in. I let the information drift past me the way smoke moves through a room, visible. Undeniable, but not something I needed to grab. Then one afternoon my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello? I answered. There was a pause on the other end. A shallow breath. Then a voice I recognized instantly. Soft, strained, trying very hard not to fall apart. It's me, she said. I don't know who else to call. Her voice trembled, but she wasn't hysterical. She was tired. And that was more telling than tears. For a moment I said nothing. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood exactly what she needed. Space. Permission. I feel like I'm disappearing. she continued, words tumbling out faster now. I can't tell when it started. I just know I don't recognize myself anymore. I closed my eyes. I had spoken those exact words once into a pillow late at night, when I still believed if I tried harder things would change. You're not imagining it, I said gently. There was a long silence, then a quiet sob quickly suppressed. Can we meet? She asked. Just to talk. We chose a small cafe on the north side of the city. Neutral. Quiet. The kind of place people go to think. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. Not because she looked worse. Because she looked smaller. Her shoulders curved inward. Her eyes darted instinctively toward the door as if expecting interruption. She ordered tea instead of coffee, apologizing to the barista as though the request were an inconvenience. We sat by the window. For a while, she just stared at her hands. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that heal both sides. He says he just wants the best for me, she finally said. That I'd be happier if I didn't push so hard. If I trusted him more. I nodded. He used to say the same thing to me. Her head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean it starts like concern, I said carefully. Then it becomes correction. And before you realize it, you're asking permission to be yourself. Her eyes filled with tears, not dramatic, not performative. Honestly, I thought if I tried harder, he'd relax, she whispered. If I was calmer, less me. I leaned forward slightly. This isn't love, I said. It's control. The words landed heavily between us. She didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She just broke. Not loudly. Not in a way that drew attention. Her shoulders shook as tears slid silently down her face. I handed her a napkin. She wiped her cheeks, embarrassed. I don't want to hate him, she said. I just want to feel like myself again. Clarity doesn't come from anger. It comes from understanding. You don't need to hate him, I replied. You just need to see him clearly. We talked for over an hour. About the rules that were never announced but always enforced. About the emotional whiplash of praise followed by criticism. About the constant sense of being evaluated. As she spoke, something shifted. Her posture straightened. Her voice steadied. Because naming something gives you power over it. When we finally stood to leave, she looked at me not as a rival, not as a threat, but as proof. Proof that survival was possible. I didn't replace you, she said quietly. No, I answered. You inherited a pattern. She nodded. And in that moment, I knew deep down that her awakening had begun. Some patterns repeat until someone chooses to break them. And she was closer than she realized. As her world began to crack, mine began to expand. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Growth rarely announces itself. It happens quietly in the spaces where fear used to live. I stopped explaining myself. That was the first change. I no longer felt the need to justify my choices, soften my opinions, or preemptively apologize for taking up space. At work, I spoke when I had something to say and didn't fill the silence when I didn't. I accepted compliments without deflecting them. I made decisions without scanning the room for approval. It felt strange at first, like walking without a brace. You'd worn for so long, you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. I stopped shrinking. I didn't announce it to anyone. There was no dramatic declaration, no social media post about finding myself. I simply began choosing myself in small, consistent ways. I took the promotion fully. Instead of treating it like something temporary, I needed to earn again. I stayed late when the work mattered, and I left on time when it didn't. I traveled for conferences without guilt. I laughed louder. Freedom isn't loud. It's steady, and it changes everything. People noticed. A colleague told me I seemed lighter. A friend said I sounded sure of myself. My mother said, "You sound like you did before." Before what, she didn't say. Daniel noticed too. At first it was subtle. A message just checking in. A like on an old photo. A carefully neutral, "Hope you're doing well." I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Daniel didn't miss me. He missed the version of himself I managed for him. The woman who anticipated his needs. Smoothed his edges. Protected his image. Without me, his life was louder. More chaotic. Less controlled. Control depends on participation. And I had withdrawn mine. Weeks passed. Then months. The woman, his wife, called me once more. Not in crisis this time. Not shaking. Calm. She told me she had started therapy, that she had begun writing again, something she had quietly abandoned when Daniel said it wasn't productive. She said, I forgot what my voice sounded like. I smiled when I hung up, not because she was struggling, but because she was waking up. Daniel's messages became more direct. I don't understand why you're being distant. We should talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There hadn't. I left them unread. For the first time, I wasn't negotiating my own peace. I was protecting it. And that's when something else shifted. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head, stopped wondering how things could have gone differently, stopped carrying the emotional responsibility of a relationship that had already ended. The past lost its grip. I filled my evenings with things that had nothing to do with being impressive. Long walks, books I read slowly, dinners with friends where no one competed for attention. I started saying no without explanation, and yes without fear. One evening, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old card Daniel had once given me. It praised my support, my patience, my understanding. Nowhere did it mention my dreams. I threw it away, not with anger, with gratitude, because I finally understood the cost of being easy to live with. You end up hard to recognize. Daniel reached out one last time. A voicemail. His voice was frustrated, edged with confusion. You've changed, he said. You're not the same person. He was right, and that was the point. Some people confuse access with entitlement. He had lost both. The woman he married wasn't weak. She had simply been unprepared. But now she was learning, and I was living. Sometimes leaving someone behind isn't failure, it's survival. The first sign wasn't an announcement. It was quiet. A message from her that simply said, Are you free to talk later? No urgency. No panic. That alone told me everything. We met again, this time at a different cafe, brighter, louder, full of afternoon conversations and clinking cups. The kind of place where life moved forward instead of inward. She looked different. Not radiant. Not triumphant. Centered. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her eyes no longer scanned the room for danger. She wore jeans and a soft sweater, no makeup beyond what felt natural. She looked like herself, whoever that was becoming. We separated, she said after a few minutes. No drama. No build-up. Just truth. I nodded, letting the moment breathe. It wasn't a fight, she continued. That's what surprised me the most. I expected yelling, tears, something dramatic. What was it instead, I asked. Clarity, she said. She told me how it happened. One evening, after another conversation that started as concern and ended as correction, something in her simply stopped cooperating. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just listened. And in that listening, she heard it clearly, the pattern, the control, the constant repositioning of herself to keep him comfortable. I realized I wasn't angry, she said. I was done. Done is a powerful word. It doesn't shout. It closes the door quietly and locks it from the inside. Daniel didn't understand. She said that part with a small, sad smile. He kept asking what changed, she said. I told him nothing changed. I just stopped lying to myself. He called it abandonment. She called it survival. She told me he tried everything: logic, guilt, nostalgia. He reminded her of vows, of timelines, of appearances. But control loses its power when you stop negotiating. I used to think I replaced you, she said softly, like I won something. I shook my head. Neither of us was the prize. She laughed then, genuinely. Freedom was. Outside the cafe, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. People passed by, unaware that two women were quietly rewriting the meaning of loss. I don't hate him, she added. I just don't belong there. Belonging. That's what had been missing all along. Not love. Not effort. Belonging doesn't require performance. As we stood to leave, she hugged me briefly, respectfully, with gratitude rather than dependence. Thank you, she said, for telling me the truth. I watched her walk away, and for the first time I saw it clearly. She wasn't broken. She was free. That evening, Daniel's name appeared on my phone one last time. I didn't answer, not because I was afraid, because I was finished. Some people only understand power when it's gone, and by then it no longer matters. I saw her again some months later. Not at a gala, not at a cafe filled with confessions, but on a quiet Saturday morning, on a tree-lined street where no one was performing for anyone else. She looked calm, not the kind of calm that comes from pretending everything is fine, but the kind that settles into your bones when you finally stop fighting yourself. She wore jeans, sneakers, her hair pulled back without precision, no tension in her jaw, no urgency in her movements. She wasn't scanning the world for approval or bracing for correction. She was present. Freedom has a face, and it doesn't look dramatic. We exchanged a small smile, the kind shared between people who understand something without needing to say it out loud. Then she spoke. "I used to think you were the one who lost," she said gently. I didn't interrupt. I thought being chosen again meant winning. That love was proof you were enough. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I see it now." I waited. She smiled, not nervously this time, not defensively. "I didn't replace you," she said. "I stepped into something you survived." I nodded. "That's the part people don't talk about," I replied. How survival gets mistaken for failure. We stood there for a moment, letting the silence do what it does best. Tell the truth without embellishment. Daniel wasn't part of the conversation, and that mattered, because the most powerful endings aren't about confrontation, they're about release. She told me she had moved into a small apartment filled with light, that she had started writing again, not for productivity, not for praise, but because it made her feel real. She had reconnected with friends she'd slowly distanced herself from, not intentionally but through exhaustion. "I didn't know how tired I was," she said. Neither had I. We talked about ordinary things, work, books, plans that didn't require permission. Then she said something that stayed with me. "He wanted a woman who made his life easier," she said. "Not one who lived her own." That was it. The truth, clean and unprotected. Some people don't want love. They want control wrapped in devotion. They want someone who reflects them, manages them, protects them from themselves. But love doesn't ask you to disappear. Love doesn't shrink when you grow. And anyone who needs you smaller doesn't love you, they need you. When she walked away, I didn't feel closure. I felt clarity, because I finally understood something that had taken years to learn. I hadn't been replaced. I had been released. Released from a role that required constant self-editing. Released from a relationship that confused endurance with loyalty. Released from the belief that being chosen again was the same as being valued. Daniel remarried quickly because stillness terrified him. I walked away slowly because I was learning to trust myself, and that made all the difference. Life after control doesn't explode into fireworks. It settles. It expands. It becomes yours. The moral is simple but not easy. If someone's love requires you to shrink, it isn't love. If staying costs you your voice, the price is too high. And if leaving feels like relief, that tells you everything you need to know. I didn't win by being chosen again. I won by choosing myself. And sometimes the most powerful ending is walking forward without looking back.